Welcome to Sisters in Company Talking About It live show. Hosted by me, Dr. Sharon Cradle and Sherelle Higgins. We will be discussing intriguing, intricate, inspirational, informative, and intelligent topics with our individual twists and talents.
We will present real stories, real solutions, and engage in real talk.
So we invite you to be our company every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock p.m. as we focus on transcendent thinking that will move you forward. You become the company you keep.
What company do you keep? Oh yeah, we are biological sisters by way of the south side of Chicago. So get ready to keep company with us and our guests as we talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sisters in Company Talking About It live show today. Thank you all for tuning in. Please, our social media followers, like, comment, and share. Make sure that you're tuning in on listenvisionlive.com so you can see the show in its entirety. And we are here today. I know Sherelle and Dr. Paulette, they were coming from Southern Virginia, and I believe you all had a lot of traffic, so they got here in the nick of time because I was just thinking to myself, I may have to do this show by myself, so what is it I'm going to do? And so I started, I write down feverishly everything that I could possibly talk about. So I'm so glad you all made it here safely. And Sherelle, you can introduce yourself, and then we'll reintroduce Dr. Paulette.
Yes, I'm Sherelle Higgins, and I'm your favorite co-host of this dynamic duo. And actually, I came from Richmond.
Yes.
I went to Richmond this morning to watch a soccer game, and came back up the road and stopped at the house and changed clothes because I had on all my Bears gear.
Oh.
But, I didn't want to smell like outside because I know how that smells. So I went home and took a shower and changed.
Yes.
But I still got on my Bears earrings because we about to whoop up on the Vikings this afternoon.
Well, I left Ira and Alyssa at home watching the Skins play, and I don't even know who they were playing.
They were playing the Giants, and they were down 17-3.
Okay.
Yeah, so if your team need a win, play the Redskins. Hey, Yvette, your team need a win. Your team need a win.
Oh, my goodness, that's so sad. But we're going to have part 2 of our conversation around mental health because it is so important. It's just one of those topics that we just really don't spend a lot of time discussing. And I just think it's so important to have an open, honest conversation about it because we see a lot happening around us, and I believe that so much of it is related to some mental health challenges, but some of it, and that's what I want to make sure Dr. Paulette talks about, what's the difference between, what's in your heart in terms of hatred and mental health, because, people do things sometimes that's just mean-spirited, just hate, hate-filled, and I don't see that as a mental health, I don't see it as being mental health related, so we'll talk about that. So, I always start the show with scripture. And I'm going to read the scripture that we used from part 1 of this particular topic, and it was Proverbs 3:13. And it says, "Blessed are those who find wisdom and those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold." But I also want to add Romans 12:2, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind."
Yes.
Because we know that, some people do a lot to take care of all parts of their bodies except their minds. And we know that we just really can't function without having our minds intact.
Yes.
And so let's welcome Dr. Paulette back for this very, very part 2 important conversation. And of course, if you would like to call in, the number is 833-202-TALK, and you can go to listenvisionlive.com so you can see the show. So we wanted to start off with a recap. So Dr. Paulette, start off by just reminding our listening audience, what is mental health? How would you describe it?
Mental health is your social, emotional, and psychological well-being. Did you need me to repeat that?
Yes.
Because I always forget to talk in the mic.
Yes.
Mental health is your social, psychological, and what did I just say? Social, psychological, and emotional well-being,
Right.
and how you function throughout the day.
Okay, wonderful. So that's your mental health, and so, but that's not the diagnosis. The diagnosis come from after you go and see someone. So your mental health encompasses all of those things. So all of them have to work together,
Absolutely.
right, to make you a whole person.
Absolutely. And when you see someone, a therapist in particular, if you're seeing someone, they should initially do an assessment, or what we call a biopsychosocial.
Right.
It's spiritual. I also always include the spiritual assessment
Yes.
as a part of my assessment of an individual.
So I don't know if you all have seen this show. It's called Black Women Own, OWN, Own Network, The Conversation. It is so powerful. I just highly recommend that you go and watch it, because one of the topics they talked about was women and mental health, Black women and mental health. And it was on the other day, and I just thought it was such a fascinating and authentic conversation around, you know, who we are and everything that we carry physically, emotionally, and spiritually, you know, that causes us to have breakdowns, or to cause us to have these mental health diagnoses, right, and these challenges. And so if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend, because I just thought the women did a great job of just being real about the conversation. And
What
about
platform is that on?
It's on OWN.
It's on OWN. Okay.
It is. It's on OWN. And it's nothing but maybe like 100 women, Black women, in a room, in the moderator. And so the panel is always somebody that you may know. I forgot who was on that particular show. Oh, I know, I think, who was on there. I don't know if you all watch, what's the show about the people that own the land in Louisiana?
Queen Sugar.
Queen Sugar. So, you know, the one that plays Aunt Vi.
Okay.
So that actress was on there, and they were just having a real conversation about that. So I just think that it's time that we start talking about, you know, how when we don't take care of our total selves,
Right.
you know, the sickness that comes about, you know, about taking care of ourselves. So yeah, so the first time, you know, you gave us the definition of that, and we gave some statistics, and I just want to make sure that I go back and make sure that you all know that it is more prevalent than what we often think.
One of our Facebook followers said, Victor, I wish you would call in. He said that he grew up in a home with mental health issues.
Okay, yes.
And so that would be great if you, Victor, could
Yes.
call in and share some of that with us.
Yes, absolutely, because I think a lot of people have, and they're not really talking about it, right? They're just
Victor,
not.
that's 833-202-TALK,
Yeah.
8255.
Yes, and so if they can call in, that would be great. But the stats are staggering, because what it said is like 1/3 of Americans
That's a lot.
is going to be afflicted or be challenged with some type of mental health. And is that what you're seeing in your data and around your practice?
Absolutely, and across the country, since the president has been in office, we've
Yes.
seen an increase. Even the APA did a study, and they showed a significant increase.
And what's the APA?
American Psychological Association.
Right.
They did a study that showed a couple years ago that showed an increase in anxiety and people
Yes.
seeking services for anxiety and depression
Right.
since he's been in
Because
office.
we're being constantly bombarded, you think,
Yes.
just with the media
with
and
the
news?
media and the dysfunction.
And the
I mean, the
dysfunction.
dysfunction
It's every
that's
day.
going on. Yeah, and
All
and
day, every
you-
day.
and you never know what's gonna happen.
Correct. And then we're seeing things that's happening to people just innocently, right? Because of the rhetoric that's being
And people's
spewed.
livelihood
Hood
being
impacted.
impacted, and never knowing when. It's almost like, when am I going to be next?
Right. You're right. Because
So last time, did we talk about whether or not it was hereditary?
Was what?
Mental health.
There are some mental health illnesses that are hereditary, or that we suspect are hereditary, that we see
Speak into the
running.
mic.
There are some mental health illnesses that we think are hereditary, or that we see run in families that may be genetic.
like what?
Like schizophrenia.
Yeah, schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia is one. A lot of times depression, but not so. It may not be so much more so of a chemical imbalance, but environmental. That we
Exactly.
see that depression and anxiety and those type of disorders.
Yes. And so we know that 1/3 That's pretty significant, and that's about the same amount of people that didn't vote. Let me just stop. In the last election.
We're not going to have that next year.
I just had to go there because that thing just burns my soul.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
But yeah, one of the things we said we were going to focus on for round 2 is our military personnel, because if you all don't recall, tell them a little bit about who you are, Dr. Paulette, and the whole connection with why we're going to talk about it from our military veterans and personnel.
I'm Dr. Paulette Hubbard. I am a licensed clinical social work. My PhD is in social work from Howard University. But I am also a 21-year veteran. I'm retired from the Marine Corps. So I've had plenty of experience as an active duty service member, and now servicing, I'd say about 50% of my practice is also servicing veterans.
Right. And so let's talk about that, because I before we came on, I was telling Dr. Paulette, I said, I hear these like little whisperings about so many of our veterans committing suicide. And I just don't see the outrage. I don't see, the media, giving attention to that, to make us aware that we have a lot of veterans who are hurting, right? And so just talk about that. Is what I'm hearing the truth in terms of numbers?
Yes.
And what's happening with our veterans?
A lot of it is, if you go to the website, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but DOD actually has a suicide department where that's all that they specifically are addressing is suicide. But the numbers have increased almost threefold since the war started. I almost said the Gulf War.
Yeah.
The war started.
Yeah.
But with that, some of our vets, they get out and they don't transition properly. Or if they're in rural areas, they may not have access to care. Some may not even be aware that they can have access to care. So, for example, the VA has a program called the Veterans Choice, where they can, especially for those veterans that are in rural areas, they can go through the VA and request mental health services, and the VA will pay for their services, for their mental health counseling. So I like to put that out there up front. So that
what's the name of that program again?
Veterans
Choice.
Veterans
Choice.
The Veterans Choice program, they can go to the VA. If you served one day in the military, you can go and request mental health counseling services through the VA, and they will pay the full bill for you to go out into your community and receive mental health services. But also, we touched last week about societal stigma with mental health. That stigma is even larger within the military community, because we've moved away from a little bit, but we totally haven't evolved from that zero defect mentality. So there's a zero defect mentality, and it's a sign of weakness.
And so what does that
seek
mean?
out mental,
zero.
That it's not okay for you to be weak in any area.
Okay.
You have to be stellar in all areas of performance, including mental capacity.
Okay.
So that stigma is attached, which also causes veterans to not seek services, and that carries over even after we get out. That can carry over after we get out.
So because we're we're trying to educate on our show, one of the things I want to make sure is, when you say veterans have a hard time transitioning, what exactly do you mean by that?
So the military community is a very structured community, and we're accustomed to, especially if you do 4 years or more, you're accustomed to having everything pretty much at your disposal. We have some of the best community services available to military members and their family members. You don't have to, that you're going to get paid regardless. There's housing available for families. There's housing, and if you can't live on base, then there's supplemental income that you get if you have to live out in town on the economy, depending on the area you live in. So there are a lot of incentives that come with the military, free health care. Now, as a retiree, I get free health care. I'll get free health care the rest of my life. But if you do...
Is it really free?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. And
okay.
it is free.
Free usually come with a price tag.
Well, I paid that price tag them 21 years.
There you
I
go.
did. I earned that
That's
free.
right.
Yeah, I earned that free.
So, but you're saying, okay, so they transition after having that kind of structure and having those access. But how's that connected with mental health?
So when in terms of mental health, they're in transitioning the things, those worries that come
The
with
anxiety.
the anxiety with surviving.
Yes.
How to take care of their family sometimes if they're not prepared to get out of the military, if there's no preparation. There's a lot of reset, what I call reset, with transition into the civilian community where where access to services that you may have had before aren't there now. And so when even in the military, if there is a mental health challenges and you seek services, then those services are free and they're usually available, readily available if you're on a base. If you're not on a base, they're still accessible. So those in terms of mental health, they still don't have those concerns of trying to access services and pay for services.
Right. And so I am married to a veteran as well. And one
So
of
you
the
trying to
things-
say my brother-in-law crazy?
No.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
going to say this
All right.
piece because I know that in families, the family side, so that's a whole different conversation, helping them to transition and experiencing that. I remember going to one of Ira's medical appointments one time, and I asked the physician, I said, why do you all talk to them and ask them about their mental health or their physical health or this, but really don't even talk to the family members because, I know that from that community, they're hoo-ah, right? I don't even know if I said that right, but
Well, it's hoorah for the Army, it's oorah for the Marine Corps. It just depends on who you talk to.
Exactly. But my point is that they're going to say that they're okay because it was ingrained in them that they can't say that something is wrong.
Exactly.
You follow what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And she was like, that was an interesting question. And I'm thinking you need to really be asking the people who are on the outside of them looking in, and having to deal with it and live with it.
I totally agree, and it is. I always invite the veteran to invite their spouse in or significant other if they have one. But here's the thing: HIPAA laws.
I understand.
I can't just reach out to a family or to a spouse and say, "I'm seeing your spouse." That spouse has to give me permission.
I understand that.
To talk to his family members. And
But
so
if they show up with you, right, and then
you still gotta say,
and I'll ask, is it okay? Or are you coming in with me? And then I'll say, is it okay that he or she comes in with us as we have this conversation? And as long as they say it's okay, then that's fine. But outside of that, I can't reach out to the family members.
So
I mean, but as Sharon was saying, like when we go into the medical appointments, right? And I go to the medical appointment with my husband after he had this situation, and we get in there and he talking about one thing, and I'm like, you don't want to tell him about why we here?
Exactly.
But I always encourage veterans to invite their, like I said, their spouse, but some won't for what
For whatever reason.
And so then it's that thing, and so I always try to work with them to encourage and help them to see the benefit of having someone giving information from the outside. But if they won't give permission, then my hands are tied.
Oh, absolutely.
So when you're working with patients, whether they're veterans or not, again, remind our audience, what is the most commonly diagnoses that you find yourself as a therapist having to work with patients on?
Depression, anxiety, and trauma. And trauma isn't just associated with the military. You can be, like we said last time, you could be in a bad car accident, child sexual abuse, or any type of abuse can create trauma. So those are the main three, and those are the three I actually specialize in: is anxiety, depression, and trauma.
And the trauma, to me, is a term that's getting larger and larger because so many people experience trauma in their lives, and they sometimes just walk away. Because one of the ladies that was on the show I was telling you all, Black Women Own the Conversation, that thing broke my heart. But it was like something just, like a light bulb came on, because when you're looking at people that you just see every day, that you really when I say you don't know people's stories,
absolutely,
you don't know people's stories. But this particular young lady from out of Baltimore, she was born in prison, trauma, right, and taken immediately from her mom and trying to give her to family members who did not want her. Right? And so being tossed around from family to family, and then at age 12, she finds herself on the street by herself.
Wow.
You know, and so now, you know, just imagine.
Yeah.
You know, and having to do things just to survive and to take care of herself. And then she's pregnant 7 times.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And so it's just a compelling story. And she, at 12, she wasn't consenting.
No,
No,
not at all.
Exactly.
Not
Right.
at all.
And so you talk about the trauma, and what I loved about that particular episode, I wanted to jump through the television screen because people were sitting there just looking and listening, because I just don't think people they don't even know what to do. But there was a doctor on there. She got up and she hugged that young lady and talked about the trauma, right? And so trauma is just, and so now you have trauma coupled with all these other diagnoses.
Yes, or that can be. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, and how do you decide what you're going to treat first?
It depends.
I mean, seriously.
It depends on, for me, it depends on what's the most pressing issue. So if they're coming in, there may be trauma and they're experiencing depression as a result of trauma that they haven't dealt with. And so especially if they're on a decline with with depression, or they're really struggling, then I may address the trauma, the depression first, as opposed to the trauma. The other thing with trauma is I will not start to treat a client with trauma until I know that we work on them having some foundational coping skills in place, and that we've addressed some other issues. If it's depression or anxiety, I require that they have those coping skills in place, and they can readily access those coping skills, and that they're utilizing them before I will address the trauma with them. And some of my clients get frustrated with me, but then once we get to the point that we start to address the trauma, they often come back and said, "I'm so glad."
Right.
You did it that way.
Therapy only happens an hour a week.
Correct.
You know, you got all the in between that you have to deal with when you're dealing with those kind of issues.
And you know, it's interesting. You know, we have people with mental illness in the workplace, right? And as leaders, you know, we're not trained to deal with people with mental health issues. And as a matter of practice, we tend to discipline those employees as opposed to try to help and support those employees.
Right.
And I see it every day in my line of work. And I know I've had a few situations where I've had to help an employee who was suffering from some type of mental health issue, and I just, you know, did what I could and, you know, read some stuff, called some hotlines, called Dr. Paulette. And so, you know, I think we have to do better by our leaders. When we put them into leadership positions, we need to show them, you know, teach them what the signs are, and show us how we should be dealing with those things, as opposed to disciplining these employees who can't necessarily help it.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that. And even in helping them, bringing on, most agencies or organizations have an EAP program.
Right.
Yes.
Really
So
using it.
utilizing that EAP counselor to help you develop a plan to help manage that employee.
And
Right.
that requires, I would say, Sherelle, suspect that it requires you having real conversation with that employee.
Oh,
as well
absolutely. That's how it starts, right?
Right.
You got to have an honest conversation.
Right, and that this is part of a plan.
Right.
And that they have to do their part, because, you know, this is work.
Absolutely.
We want you here, but you have to be well, right, when you're here. And so so that we can avoid, you know, going down this road, whatever that next road may be, you have got to commit yourself to trying to get better.
But we don't, and I can only talk about my industry, right? We don't promote EAP for supervisors to use as a resource to help them deal with employees with mental health issues. We only promote EAP for individuals and their families to use when they have drug and alcohol abuse issues. And EAP is so much more than that. And we just don't promote it that way. So supervisors don't even know that they can reach out to EAP to get some assistance on helping.
Some advice or...
Absolutely.
And reasonable accommodations.
Right.
Also
exactly.
encouraging your client
Yes.
your employee to make sure that they apply for reasonable accommodations.
Well, you know what? Let me just tell you something about reasonable accommodation. They just had. Okay, we get ready to do a what burns my soul.
Okay.
Because now in the workplace, the only reasonable accommodation that employees ask for is the ability to work from home, and it drives me crazy. And again, supervisors are not taught. And the reasonable accommodation people are not taught to say, no, that is not reasonable. And no, we're going to figure out something else. And it just burns my soul because we have now turned teleworking into something that is not really for. And, that's the only way that employees, think that they could be accommodated.
Oh, that's interesting.
That is very interesting.
Sometimes that may be important, under some circumstances.
Under some,
Yeah.
but not everyone.
Right. No.
Like I had an employee who had a back issue, right? And for her reasonable accommodation, she couldn't come to work on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I said, well, what's wrong with your back on Tuesday and Thursday? Like, well, how you know it's only going to happen on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? Tell your doctor to send me something to tell me why your back don't hurt on Tuesday and Thursday, and then we could talk.
Yeah, that sounds like something different.
See, but that's what it's turned into,
Yeah,
and it burns my soul. Okay, I'm gonna get off my box.
Well, I'm so glad we let you get that out. And you have to get things out.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I was listening to something this morning, and they were talking about perspective and overthinking. That overthinking is a beast.
Boy,
Yes.
it can be.
Yeah, and I think overthinking can take you places that you were not even trying to go.
Exactly.
Because you're trying to figure out every little thing, and then I call it negative self-talk, and I want to talk about that. I don't know if you deal with that.
Absolutely.
That whole negative self-talk that sometimes we say to ourselves, and then you just get into this routine of saying it to yourself because somebody said it to you about you.
Yes.
You believe it. You take it on. So every time you don't show up perfect, you have that negative self-talk.
Right. And so what I'll say to that, first of all, is do not be defined by someone else's limitations.
Right.
Oh,
So-
I love it.
Exactly.
Do not be defined by someone else's limitation. I'm adding that to
Right.
my list.
Yes, do not be defined by someone else's limitations. So in other words, whatever someone thinks they know you or how,
Exactly.
despite of how well they think they know you, do not assume because especially if they're being negative toward you, that's the truth about you. Don't accept that as truth. You look for, and absolutely, this is the foundation of working with individuals with low self-esteem and some of the other things, depression and all of those things that come into play. A lot of times, majority of the time, that's where I start in checking in with them on where they are with their self-esteem and the negative self-talk. Because you're right, it just fuels and it continues to fuel, and it can become like a wildfire in their thinking, and then it affects their behavior, mood, everything. So
And, I find it more prevalent in women than men. I often hear women say, I don't like this about me, or, I'm too this or I'm too that. And I'm just like, really? Like, why? And when I hear women say that, I start calling them out. I'm like, well, what is it that you do like about yourself? Let's focus on that. Because, if you just look in the mirror, and I taught at this conference, and I asked a room full of people, how many people like to look at themselves in the mirror? When I tell you only about 3 hands went up,
Exactly.
that spoke volumes to me. I was one of the 3 because I'm like, I like me. I love looking at me. And so, that just tells you that people's self-esteem is low.
Absolutely.
And when they look in the mirror, all they see is the negative and they don't see the good. And so... But you don't hear men speak like that.
And let me say, when you say those things, I like looking at me in the mirror too. So, but that's not being conceited. And a lot of people think that it's being conceited, or those type of negative, those self-centered and those or selfish.
Well, I was gonna talk
and
about
those
that.
type
Yeah.
of things. Those type of things come into play. So addressing that negative self-talk is paramount before I usually move into anything else in addressing someone unless they're in crisis, because that a lot of time is the foundation of whatever else may be going on with them.
And I believe that people who have low self-esteem, when they meet someone who has a high self-esteem, that's a serious conflict.
Yes.
And then they don't know even how to deal with someone like that because they're only so used to giving or doing so much for a person, right? In other words, you're used to dealing with somebody that has a low self-esteem, so that's all you know how to give. So you're not being forced and pushed and challenged to do more, to raise the bar in terms of how you're talking to people. Because people that got high self-esteem like me, I'm like, no, you can't tell me that about me. That,
Exactly.
and even if it's true, it's just one of those things, but you're not going to define me for the rest of my life by that thing because I'm not going to allow you.
Right.
Because when they start defining you by that thing and they tell you, that's how they start treating you.
Absolutely.
And then your mind from negative self-talk, you're like, you just start going there and start believing stuff. And then I think that's when you start crossing that line, getting into these whole mental health challenges.
Absolutely. In depression, anxiety,
Yes.
sometimes bipolar, a lot of different issues can come up as a result of that negative self-talk. And so one of the ways that a couple of things, since we're talking about it, a couple of things that I have my clients do when we're talking about addressing negative self-talk is, one, I ask them, where's the evidence? Those things that you
like that. Where's the evidence?
those things that you have allowed other people to define you by.
Exactly.
Where is the evidence that that's true? I also have a second book, All That I Am to Be, A Woman's Worth.
Yes.
And I wrote that back in 2006, 2007. But I talk about that. I work with a client that she had been a valedictorian. She was high on the ladder in her business world, making six figures, had been a valedictorian of her bachelor's and her master's degree, and she didn't think she was smart. And I was like, what?
Right.
What else you need to do?
But her parents had
exactly
told her all her life she was stupid. She wasn't going to amount to anything, blah, blah, blah. And here's what I'll say. What burns me, we're talking about what
burns your
me,
soul.
is when I hear somebody say, just get over it.
Oh.
When you have been conditioned to think
Talk
a
about
certain
it,
way
Paulette.
or to believe a certain thing about yourself, and the thing about children is you have to be so careful about what you say to your children and how you speak to your children, because they don't have a reference point.
No, they don't.
And if you especially if you mother or father, mama or daddy, and you're speaking these things, and that's who they know, that they love, they believe, that they trust, then guess what? They're going to believe those things. And so then they carry it out into the world. And so then when the world challenges them, they don't have anything to stand on.
Right.
And then they accept whatever the world throws at them, which then goes back to they allow other people to define who they are.
Exactly. It's funny that you said that. There was a young lady. I guess our videos have stopped running.
My video playing. Come on, let's go.
Okay. So, I read a story recently about a young lady that's getting some type of high award in her field, right? But growing up, her father would always say to her, as a female, you can't do that. You're not smart. You won't be smart. And now this young lady has grown up and she had to go and have that conversation with her father to say, and she was kind of hesitant to have that conversation with the father because she just didn't want to, start any problems in the family, right? And the father still just did not respond the way that she expected him to respond. Isn't that something?
Right.
And then, then you wonder why, these people are sitting there with depression,
Right.
not feeling loved, not feeling nurtured, just all of that. And so I just think that's such a phenomenal conversation. But it also leads into this whole topic of narcissism. Let's talk about narcissism because
Trump. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Trump.
Oh, Trump. Oh, yeah. So when I looked up narcissism, right? When I looked up narcissism,
You saw his picture?
and I'm just going to read the definition. It says, the pursuit of gratification from vanity or egotistic admiration of one's idealized self-image and attributes. For example, self-flattery, perfectionism, and arrogance. So take us home, Dr. Paulette. Because I believe that a whole lot of human beings have some form of narcissist? I don't know.
Well,
Tell me.
I think there's a difference in
Okay.
narcissistic traits and you having confidence in yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a
Absolutely.
difference. Now, am I confident? I'm definitely confident.
Yes,
but
me
I'm
too.
not
Perfectionism
narcissistic.
and-
Me either.
You know, narcissistic, like you said, is they have this grandiose ideal about themselves and who they are, and they don't have a problem with pumping themselves up when everybody else around them is seeing something different.
Right.
But here's the thing with narcissists: they're fragile.
Yes,
That-
they are
yeah.
Their
fragile.
self-esteem.
Okay.
Their self-esteem is fragile,
Trump.
and so that is a defense. So it's a defense mechanism for them to then start to develop and see themselves as grandiose, and then it turns into a disorder,
Right.
Because it becomes rampant and a part of their character and who they are. So when you talk about narcissists, to start working with a narcissist. Those are sometimes they can be more difficult clients because that defense mechanism
Right.
is so
Very defensive.
very defensive.
Yes.
And they've worked to build these walls and these defenses, and so sometimes even dealing with those walls and starting to unpack some of the issues that come along that help to create the narcissism can be difficult because and because the other part of that is because they are literally so fragile.
Right.
You have to really create a delicate balance in addressing the grandiose attitudes and behavior.
Exactly, and I can imagine that they would say that nothing's wrong with them, or they didn't,
Absolutely not. No,
or
of
when some
of
things
course.
happen to them in their younger lives,
Yes.
this, I'm fine, I came out fine. I'm like, no, you didn't.
Right.
What you did was you took on some narcissistic behavior.
Right.
Which is that defense.
Exactly.
To keep that fragility from them breaking down. Our minds are fascinating. Well, I've already
Oh,
said I
yes,
love human
it
behavior.
is. It
Our
is.
minds are fascinating, and we can find all kind of ways to protect.
Right.
And so when you see people that have defense mechanisms in place, and especially strong defense mechanisms in place,
Right.
those have been developed in order to protect them mentally and sometimes physically from experiencing whatever pain they've been exposed to.
Exactly, and I believe that some of them take on this
Yes.
whole sense of perfectionism too.
That is
Yes.
a part of
And,
it.
and
Yes.
then when they grow
Trump.
up to be adults, and you try to have conversations with them, they push back. I mean, push back like instantly, right?
Well, because again, it's
Yeah.
that fear of not being seen as good enough,
Right.
Or not being
Right.
accepted,
Or being discovered.
being discovered.
right.
Yeah,
For their
and so-
true self.
Yeah, and so then that's where you see the pushback because you're challenging that fragility.
Exactly.
That comes along with
Yeah,
those
and
traits.
it's just instant, and I've known some people like that, and I tell you, I didn't know that that's what it was called, to be very honest with you, but I knew the perfectionism piece. But now it makes a little bit more sense to me.
Perfectionism can be separate from narcissism.
I know it can,
too.
but it has the whole the whole package. And then when you think about it, and this is a whole different conversation. When you think about your birth order and family, sometimes right, and what you tend to pick up, what we tend to pick up, being the oldest, being the middle child, being the youngest, and it's not true for all. I'm just talking about generally speaking.
Right.
And some of this stuff we pick up
Right, absolutely.
as a result of that, especially
Absolutely.
this whole perfectionism thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I thought it was important to talk about that, and you all heard Sherelle in the back saying Trump. So Sherelle, so why did you keep saying Trump?
Because he has all that, and he just has all of that, and it's sickening, and at times it could be very comical, but it's clear that he has a mental health challenge.
Yes.
And the whole notion of him, running our country and doing the things that he's doing, and then saying, look over there, not over here. It is just, it's astounding to me. And I think we're witnessing something in our country that we've never seen before. And so because it's unprecedented, we don't really know how to handle it.
Yes.
But we getting there.
And so, have you ever had to treat somebody with that diagnosis?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And so, were you?
And it can be
successful, or-
extreme.
Okay.
That sometimes it depends on the individual. In terms of being successful, what do you mean?
In terms of
being
helping to
able-
treat them and helping them to get them in some type of balance,
Yes.
where they can go out like you. I know you're giving them strategies and tools. So because in order for somebody who's narcissist to come to you, they've had to hit rock bottom.
Yes.
I
Right.
can
Yes.
imagine.
Yes.
And I don't know what that would look like for that person, but they've hit rock bottom. So when that person has come to you, you know, were you able to, you know, help create a treatment plan to help them to kind of manage their life
Absolutely.
better?
And balancing, and that's what, you know, like I said, it's a really a delicate process because they're already fragile. So you don't want to pounce in on addressing some of the obvious behaviors that happen. But absolutely, I've been successful in helping individuals find some balance. And really, and it is about rebuilding their self-esteem and them really discovering their worth and believing it and accepting it for what it is, as opposed to all of these grandiose ideas. And then there are some that, when it's extreme, that I haven't been successful with, that I may have referred or someone else may. Some have been in. I've worked inpatient mental health services, and you see a lot of it in the mental health inpatient programs, that narcissist or that narcissism attitude and behaviors coming out. So it just really depends on the individual.
So, Dr. Paulette, do you think that we're, as a society, from the health perspective, field perspective, are we getting better with recognizing and addressing mental health and offering to treat, or is it going kind of backwards? Because I don't know. I'm looking at it anecdotally, and I don't know what I'm seeing.
I think we've gotten better in terms of trying to increase awareness over the years. When you know, if you look back from, depending on how far back you want to go in history, I think we've gotten better. HMOs are better. Insurance companies are better about authorizing services than they were before. Back years ago, about 10 years ago or plus, they would only authorize up to 8 sessions. Well, we're just getting started at 8 sessions because the first couple of sessions is really information gathering.
Right.
And so now those type of restrictions aren't in place. If you need long-term and inpatient, you have to get pre-approval. But they've made a lot of adjustments to accommodate people that need services. So I think we are evolving in some ways. And I mentioned earlier with the military, that stigma.
Right.
Even the military is evolving in terms of them being more proactive in trying to get individuals in for services when they need services.
And tell me if I'm correct with this statement. You know, particularly when you have been traumatized in childhood, or, you know, you were traumatized as a young adult, now you're older, and you go to get mental health services. I believe that the common person expects them to get better immediately.
Yes, I've had that conversation.
Or they expect them to act normal.
Or
Whatever
them to act
normal
whatever
is.
that is.
Right,
you know,
whatever that
and
is.
Can you talk
Typical.
about that?
Let's
Because
say that
I
act
think
typical.
that
Yes.
is so very important. Because I'm thinking in my mind, if a child was traumatized at 3 and now they're 53, that's 50 years.
Yes.
That's
worth
supposed to
of-
be fixed in 8 sessions.
Exactly.
And that's 50 years of, now it's become complex trauma.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
Yes.
9 times out of 10, I can say 99.9% of the time, if you look over the trajectory or their lifespan, they have done things and behaviors that have been as a result of reacting out of that trauma, and sometimes not even being aware that that's why they're acting the way they act.
Exactly.
And so they piled on other issues and problems because they're acting as a result. And I've even had to have conversations with clients that, look, I don't have a magic wand.
Right.
I can help you, but I don't have a magic wand.
Yeah.
You've spent, 10, 15, 20, 30 years of acting in this dysfunctional way.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not going to take 10, 15, 20 years to fix it, but you're going to have to put in some work, and and there's some things that we're going to have to do in order to get you to a place of balance.
And so let me ask you, because we're using the term fix, but seriously, is that, what's the proper terminology? Because I'm thinking, if they've been traumatized, they have this significant mental health disorder, is it something that can be fixed?
It can be eradicated depending on it. Again, remember there's over 200 diagnoses,
right?
And so like those severe personality disorders,
right?
Some of those are long-term treatment.
Exactly.
Whereas if someone just something happened to someone and then they went into this bout of depression, those things can be addressed quicker and bring them back to a place of balance a lot faster. So it just really depends on the individual, the diagnosis, and what needs to happen.
Well, of course, our show is going really, really quickly, and we're going to run out of time in a minute here. But Dr. Paulette, I would love for you to come back because one of the most common amongst everyday language for people is depression. And I would really like to have a conversation solely on depression and what that looks like and how you deal with it if you're living with somebody who suffers from depression, if you're suffering from depression and you haven't been treated and you haven't, asked for help, because that's just something that, I think most of us, the terminology most of us know.
Yeah, and most of us have experienced on some level because there's different levels of depression and there's different types of depression. Some depression, I do encourage the client to get on medication, and then others I'm like, look, we need to just develop a treatment plan and go from there. If you're willing to put in the work, then medication may not be needed. So I would love to come back and talk about, because we could do a whole show just on depression.
And for women, Black women of color, right?
Yes.
People, they'll say, well, something's wrong with you, and you need to say, yeah, I'm depressed.
Right, exactly.
And so they try to make you feel like something is
wrong
with you because you are feeling this kind of way, and it's a chemical.
Sometimes, and then with depression too, a lot of times it's misconstrued as laziness. That person's late, or lack of motivation. When actually those are symptoms.
Weak. What's wrong with you?
Or you weak? Yeah. And when actually those are symptoms of depression.
Okay.
But, absolutely. That could be a whole show talking about that.
And so, we have a caller, so we're going to make sure we take this caller. Hold on. Hello, caller. Welcome to Sisters in Company.
Hello.
Hi. What's your name and what's your question
my name
or
is
comment?
Victor.
Oh, okay. Hi, Victor.
Hi, Victor.
What's your question or comment?
Oh, my comment is, first of all, how you doing, ladies?
We're doing fine. Thanks for asking.
My comment is, I grew up in a household that had a lot of mental illness, and I think that it's a subject that a lot of our people especially fail to deal with. Growing up, I realized it was apparent to me around the age of 8 or 9 when my mother had a nervous breakdown that I was in a household that was my mother had mental illness, and y'all got to help me out with this because I've never called into a show.
Oh, that's okay. You're doing well, actually. Take your time.
I'm having a little bit of a struggle talking on the phone. So anyway, but before that, I suffered a lot of physical abuse under that situation. I probably got beat every day for every little thing. It seemed to me as a kid like every day, but it was every little thing was just big deal. And I wondered why other kids didn't get beat like I did outside of the physical abuse. The older I got, as far as, going into preteen and teenage, I became more and more aware that something was wrong with my situation. And I was coming home to a lot of food shortages and power outages. And, my mother would say abusive stuff. Men would prey on my mother because they knew that, she was easy pickings pretty much, and it's just a very traumatic thing for a child to go through. It took me a long time to kind of find my way and navigate through that instance, even well into my adulthood. I probably was in my mid-30s before I really started seeking out help for the situation that I was suffering from, and realizing that I had been affected by how I was brought up.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that had to be difficult, and I don't know if Dr. Paulette wants to add or ask a question.
As you were talking, my first thought was, how are you taking care of yourself now?
How am I taking care of myself now? I'm doing very well now. I'm in a very good space in my life, spiritually, physically. I have good relationships. I used to have very bad. I used to be the toxic person, and I had to look at. I had to step back and look at myself, and understand why I didn't get invited to parties, or why I had bad relationships with women, and I had to take personal inventory and find out why that was. And I did a lot of soul searching, and through counseling and a lot of self-help, from even watching. That was a period in my life for about 5 years. I had a construction job where I was pretty much my own boss. And being my own boss, I would come home every day at 4:00 and watch Oprah show. I would watch Oprah, and I would draw. Oprah. I would draw a lot. I would draw a lot from that. Even though it said that her show was predominantly for the female audience, I would flip it and make it for me because it pertained to me. So I would use it, and then and that and counseling helped me out, and then wanting to be a good father to my children, making sure I didn't pass on anything to them. It just made me work hard in trying to overcome a lot of depression issues, verbal abuse issues, physical abuse issues that I had adopted, really from my childhood years.
Well, God bless you, my brother. Right. I'm so glad to hear that you did seek counseling and that you did you got help for it, because a lot of times, most of the time, abused children take on the problem as their own, and that is their fault.
Right.
And then they feel unloved, not understanding that the mental health, that the parent may be suffering from a mental health issue, doesn't mean that they don't love them. If the mental health issue is undiagnosed or not being treated, then they take it out on the closest ones. We hurt the ones we love. So, bravo to you for realizing that you needed to seek services beyond what you could do for yourself. And I wish you all the luck and success in the future.
And I would like to say, in terms of educating our audience, thank you, first of all, for sharing.
Yes.
But can you point to one thing that made you say, I need some help and I am going to get some help? Or was it cumulative?
It was cumulative. Like I said, I would be in environments. Okay, the one thing that really, I think, rock bottom for me, I had a construction job. And at 26, I was making about $85,000 a year. I had no car. I didn't have a house. And I worked this job making that type of money for about 7 years. And when I lost the job, when I lost the job because the company, another company bought it, and they brought in their own people, and I lost the job, it put me in a place where I had to do some soul searching, and I went through a short period of depression. And that was the one thing that made me just go all the way back. Why don't I have, because I wasn't the only one that was on the job making that type of money. There were other guys, and to this day, they have prospered. That was a springboard for them, for businesses. Some of them own 4 or 5 homes, and all I had was I had a little small savings account. I had saved enough money that I didn't have to work for 2 years, but I still didn't know. I didn't have any direction from that. I couldn't take advantage of an $80,000 a year job at 27 and 28 years old. And that made me know that it wasn't about the finances. As in the words of the rapper T.I., some of us are just piss poor morally. And I think that was me.
Wow.
Well, thank you for that, Victor.
I'm telling you, thank you for that.
Because we are running out of time, and I want to say thank you for calling in. Thank you for sharing. Know that you are not alone, and we will be praying for your continued path forward. And thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bless you. Thanks. Wow, the show. What a great way to end the show, actually.
Right.
And I don't know if you have any summary or parting words that you want to share with the audience.
We've touched on different symptoms and different problems that may manifest as a result of a mental health challenge. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily rise to the occasion of a diagnosis, but when it does, seek services. When it rises to the level of or the occasion that you're not able to function, or the people around you don't want to be around you anymore, then seek services.
Yes, because some people can just be overwhelming and they don't understand. They can just be so overwhelming because, you know, and I think people that are narcissists or have some type of mental health challenges, I think, Sherelle, you said this earlier, they always see what's wrong with everybody else and not see what's wrong with them.
Right, but if you're the one that's always, if you're the common denominator, then guess what?
Yes.
It's probably you.
You're the problem.
Yes.
It can't be everybody else.
Exactly.
It just can't be everybody else.
Yes. And so thank you all for tuning in. The show is over, and we really, really thank Dr. Parlett for coming in.
Yes.
And we know when we started this, it was going to be a series, so you will be back at some point, because it's just a necessary continuous conversation that needs to be held. And so next week, we're going to have... we're going to continue our conversation about bullying, and we're going to really talk about it when we talk about bullying in children. Okay? And so thank you all, and hopefully you will be able to tune in next week. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
And go Bears.
Not sure if the Skins won, but okay.
Probably didn't.
Thank you all for tuning in.
Bye.
I hope you got something out of the show. Have a good afternoon.
Welcome to Sisters in Company Talking About It live show. Hosted by me, Dr. Sharon Cradle, and Sherelle Higgins. We will be discussing intriguing, intricate, inspirational, informative, and intelligent topics with our individual twists and talents.
We will present real stories, real solutions, and engage in real talk.
So we invite you to be our company every Sunday afternoon at 3:00 p.m. as we focus on transcendent thinking that will move you forward. You become the company you keep.
What company do you keep? Oh yeah, we are biological sisters by way of the South Side of Chicago. So get ready to keep company with us and our guests as we talk about it.